Hey, so thank you everybody for joining the webinar today. This is week six of, or week, I'm jumping ahead. But anyhow, it's week three of the six webinar series that we're doing on the AIPOS. If you recall, we kind of went inside out, right? The very first week, Melissa and I actually did an overview of the AIPOS. And then the week after, I went in and I talked about the kind of the internals, right? So the third pillar, which was governed delivery process and how that happens, right? And using the governance kit. And then last week, what we did was we talked about the first pillar, the design, the define and design. I'll talk about that again in a minute. I want to show my favorite slide. But what we're going to talk about today is rapid validation, basically the proof before we move things into delivery. Again, I have Melissa with me, so she'll either be cutting me off because I talk too much and don't wait, or I'll pause and allow others to participate. But if you have any questions as we go ahead and raise your hand or do what you do, and Eric or Jason will let us know. All right. So go, and I thought I turned my messages off. So anyhow, so I'd like to start with this slide because one of the things we're trying to do is in this in the AI world and the AIPOS is that we want to look at how can we drive AI and use AI build agents to do most of the grunt work that we had to do before, and frankly, we were probably not taken care of, right? And so last week, and Melissa, if you want to talk about this a little bit, but last week we talked about define and design. And what really we're doing over there is Melissa's actually been working on a discovery engine that pulls in evidence from different sources, could be Gong, your ticketing system, things like that, and then applying context to it, like maybe your internal CRM system that talks about sales, deals you've closed, other conversations that you might be having with sales. And so what it does is it pulls that evidence together. She's got a scoring engine in there, prioritizes them, talks about risk. And then, but then the question is what do you do from there, right? And what that process is very heavily analytic, right? And, I'm sure Melissa will tell you, but this happens all the time where everybody knows there's a ton of great data out there, but they don't have time to go look at it. So how can you leverage AI to do that? And then that 70-30 split is that 30% of when this is what people are left to do, right? The basically, give me that list, tell me what you think is important, and then I'll go in and interview customers and do things like that, right? And so what we're going to talk about today is that second pillar. So we're going to assume that the discovery engine's running and we're getting a list of things to look at. And now what we want to do is we want to do some validation with the customer so that we can get to this line in the middle, which is basically, do we move forward with it? And then we can take it through the process, right? And so today when we talk about it, the validation part is also very heavily, there's a lot of stuff that AI can do for us, but if we're talking to our customers and we're doing some analysis on our product, we want people involved in that. Cool. So this is what we're going to kind of go through, right? It may not be in specific order because I do bounce around, but this is really the closeout of the build to learn, right? So we'll talk about, basically the two sides of the AIPOS. On the left-hand side, we're trying to learn and do some discovery. It's better, cheaper to do it there than it is after we built the product. Have a little bit of a validation window. We'll talk about that. What does it mean to validate? We talk about evidence, not opinion. We want to make sure that when we're moving forward, that we have evidence from the system, from our customers, whatever external sources we can bring in, so that we're not just guessing, right? Like I can't tell you how many calls I was in with, and this is nothing against product managers because I love all you guys, but I've been in meetings where a sales guy will come back and say, look, I just talked to a customer. If we can get this feature in by the end of the month, we're looking at $10 million. And everybody's like, $10 million, that's awesome, right? You're working at a startup. So everybody stop, drop, and roll. We bust your butt for a month, and we give the product to the customer. And turns out that the revenue stream never actually matches up, right? And so while that may have been a good idea, maybe the customer said they would use it. When push came to shove, they didn't want to pay for it, right? So want to make sure that we understand this before we start going and building things. So we want to have a hard gate. Could be revision to our initial hypothesis, or a go or no go, right? And then we'll talk again about how the 8 governance pillars kind of lay out through this process, and then we'll talk about the webinar that we're going to do next week. So, like I said, the AIPOS basically splits into not necessarily has, but pillar 1 and 2 are really the build to learn, right? So what we want to do is, in this case, speed matters. You want the investment to be small. Failure is cheap here. So you want to go through as many prototypes, as many questions with the customers that you can without inundating them. The nice thing that you'll see is that what we noticed, obviously, coming out of the Discovery Engine is it'll come up with some ideas, but the evidence is linked back to specific customers that seem to care about that, right? Conversations that we've had. Maybe they put in a ticket. Maybe they were talking to support, and they may have called to complain about something and then had an idea for a feature. All kinds of things can bring this information in, right? And so the idea is that if you can capture those, and you want to go after, you're not really beating up customers. Some people are worried that, hey, I'm going back to my customer too often. Well, if I'm one of your customers and I told you I was interested in something, and you called me and said, hey, we're thinking about working on this feature, can we jump on a call? Like, yeah, I'd be interested in that phone call, right? Or that email. So we want to think about that, right? If we have the evidence and then we're going to validate it, it makes that conversation or that connection to the customer a lot more valuable. And again, like I said, failure is cheap here. If you talk to the Marty Kagans of the world and other people, they'll talk about doing. I think at one point I was listening to an Audible. I swear he said do 500 prototypes or prototypes in a week. I don't know if that's physically possible, but I get the point, right? Like, do a bunch. Right? So you want to get stuff in front of your customers. And then the second half or the second part are the other 3 pillars. Now, again, it's not sequential, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that before we go past this hard gate, right, that red line is, I've interviewed customers. I think that there's valid revenue, and now I want to go build this. So I want to put a team together, going to put together real specifications, and we're actually going to go now and build it. So again, this portion, this is roughly the split. I put numbers here, but could it be 60-40? Could it be 90? Depends, right? But what you want to do is, I think, when we're looking at how do we convert to AI, we want to question every decision we make and see, hey, can I put an agent in place? Could I use Claude Cowork in this section to help make things go faster, right? What is that level that I can leverage AI so that I have more time to investigate or review or talk to customers, right? So on the 75, yeah.
I was just going to say, and that's basically where the idea for the discovery agent was born, right? As you mentioned, like we're looking at something that pulls information from Gong, from Zendesk. I actually spoke with one of my colleagues yesterday on the sales side, and he was super excited that he's not going to have to, swarm through all sorts of Gong data, right, to understand what the customers are after. So that is where AI is been very helpful, and where some of these agents are going to really help speed up our ability to get things to market.
Yeah, that's very cool, right? It's always fun when you're building something and people, basically your customers, right, are telling you, hey, this is going to be great. I can't wait till you get this done. When can I have it, right? And so Melissa's been teasing them with some data, so I think it's about time to give it to them. It'd be fun. And so and it is huge, the amount of data that they're looking at, and I don't know if he said it specifically, but one of the other stakeholders was like, we don't even get to all of it, right? So we're looking at as much as we can, but you're going into quarterly planning and you're doing what you can to keep up, right? So how cool would it if it's automated and it's refreshing itself, right? And so the other part of that is that what are the humans doing, right? You still want humans in for judgment, right? Read what the users actually did, not just what they said, right? When you build these, whether it's a prototype or if you put together like a questionnaire or some sort of conversational aid for either your salespeople or somebody to call a customer, you want to hear these things. You want to be able to respond to what they're saying and then what they actually do. Right? And then obviously the go no go, or do we revise? Definitely a human decision. And then decide what the evidence actually means, right? Because you're going in there like any other statistical analysis, right? You got to make sure that did we have a spike and it's leaning towards something we know about it, we should go in and investigate, right? And can we continuously clean up the model, right? So feeding the model back, feeding data back into the model to help train it. So the AI is leveraged very high here, but it's still the human judgment that's the scarce resource that's still the most valuable, especially at this point, right? Because now you're going to make a decision, or you're going to take and go into quarterly planning or monthly planning and say, hey, this is where I want to place my bets. This is where I want to spend money because I think we're going to get this kind of revenue back. So I'm just going to talk went through a couple different, hey, let's talk to scenarios, and we could do something a little bit more beefy, but it starts to muddy the story. So I just want to let's just talk about something that everybody in industry is talking about now, and it's basically just an AI support assistant. And it's just going to be something simple. We want to do a RAG-based assistant. And for those of you that are new, kind of RAG means that there's some external documentation that we're pulling in, feeding it to the LLM, feeding it to a large language model, having some prompts, and then getting a response back, right? So in most cases, what will happen is if you're building one of these chatbots is you're going to pull in a bunch of customer data, maybe transcribe calls from your top 10, 20 agents, and to understand sentiment and how they respond to questions, and then any kind of knowledge base that you want to feed in, right? So that's kind of the general idea. And then it's going to have kind of two surfaces, right? We want the customers to be able to ask questions, but then you also want your support agents to be able to get to it, maybe have a console. And the goal, obviously, is for them to be able to answer tickets faster or to reroute them to the right place, right? And so, you're sitting around thinking about this idea, and you think that the scope is that you want to answer the question based on categories and existing help center, and out of scope or account changes, things like that. And so in order to do this, you may see this popping up in and I'll show a prototype UI, but you may see this kind of escalating in your evidence that you're coming in, and then you want to go off and validate, right? Would it really help your customer support people if you added this agent, right, or this workflow? So the idea is that it's cheap to do this before development, right? A week of prototyping and you throw it away, it doesn't cost as much, right? You have a couple people. It gets a little bit more expensive, obviously, after you're into development and you're starting to test this thing out. Maybe you're using your developers, and if you go by sprints, you're 2 sprints in. You're trying to show people demos at the end of the sprints, and you run into a problem. You got to redo everything, right? That's starting to get expensive, and obviously, if you go out into production with something that the customers don't like, it's brutal, right? It's expensive. You got to fix it. We all know, we say this all the time, shift left. The further left you can go to identify and help determine if these are the right things to build, the better you are, and the cheaper it is. And then with AI, I'd argue that that if you don't do this, what ends up happening is this brutality all the way to the right happens so fast that you don't catch it right away, right? You'll go through a couple cycles of a bad product before you know what hit you, right? Because You have these coding agents now that are helping you build faster. So, a couple of the just kind of failure modes, right? Just skipping this whole process. I see a lot of organizations do that now, right? They may do some prototyping. Maybe it's too hard or it was too difficult. I worked with a company about 3 or 4 years ago, and the product manager was very much wanted to, prototype things. He was like, "Can we just build a fake web page? Can we just do this? Can we do this?" And the development team was so under the gun to deliver current product that they didn't have time, or they didn't, it felt disruptive to them. So they pushed back all the time. So this created a problem for the product manager. The good news is with AI, that problem kind of goes away, right? The product manager can usually build this. If you give them a way to deploy it, a static HTML page that they can deploy to their customers, or to show somebody on a screen, it's let them, right? Let them go out and do that, right? It's not touching production systems, not showing any PII, nothing like that, right? So with AI, you have the ability to do this even more. And then the other thing you kind of have to watch out for is kind of never leaving this build to learn phase. You're spending so much time prototyping, things like that you kind of get paralyzed with the analysis, right? You don't need it to be perfect. You just need to be directionally happy. So let's talk about how and what we validate. So in this case, what you want to do is you want to think about, what is the problem in the use case, right? And this is from, the customers, what are their jobs to be done type thing? Like, what are they trying to do? And how are you going to go target that experience, right? Do you have the data sources you need to provide context? Like, let's say let's say the prototype goes well and the customer wants to move forward. Well, if internally you don't have the infrastructure to actually build it, you may want to wait, right? You may have to do a feasibility study with the development team before you take off running, right? So all of these are the kind of things that you need to do in this validate phase. So what's going to happen is, right, you want to generate these prototypes, come up with the concept fast, go out. And it may not be, I'm actually going to show you a couple different examples of things, right? It may not always be a prototype. Maybe it looks like a mock-up and it just has 2 cards on the slide. Maybe it looks like an actual application that they can click and kind of follow through the flow. Maybe it's a script that you want to give to your salespeople or that you want to use to call and talk to your customers and have questions. You want those questions based in the data, right? And then you want to be able to analyze and score these points, right? Or score the responses. So I just want to show you something that, like, from, as we were working through the discovery engine, just a way to kind of visualize things. Now, with the discovery engine, it probably makes more sense to live in the tool that you use. So a lot of product managers nowadays are in AHA or possibly Jira Discovery. I forget what Jira's portfolio product is. Maybe it's Jira Portfolio. But eventually what you want to do is be able to get these into your workflow, right? So coming out of the discovery engine, you might see a list like this, right? So you have an insights feed. And so here are the insights, right? So information, and again, this sample data, right? So, but let's say it comes through, you got some information from Gong, Zendesk, some emails, and it's kind of just giving you an overall of what the evidence summary is. And the engine will go in and score it. And so let's go ahead and just, investigate or take a look at this first one, right? So I'm a preem. I'm going to come in and I'm going to take a look. It's going to give me a little bit more detail about the evidence that exists, right? So how does it feel about the strength? It's doing some internal scoring. Who are the personas that might be interested in this? Or the persona, actually, these are personas that were identified in the discovery engine, right? So the discovery engine comes up with the evidence, it ties it to personas and brings it out, right? So it's kind of cool. You can view an evidence graph. This, because it's fake data, it's not all that exciting. It's kind of flat. But hold it. So let's try this again, please. Click. So so to go investigate the problem, the reason I'm going in here again, prototype screen, but these are the kind of things that you want to do, right? Now, if your engine, and we want to think AI first, right? So our engine's identified things that we should investigate. It's also given us some context around the information. So it's holding that information. So if I go to build, like, let's say I want to build an interview guide, what should happen is that this interview guide should be built on the information that was in the evidence and things like that. So what you want it to do is understand what is it that I'm trying to go discover? What's my hypothesis and what's the data telling me? And I want to go verify this with the customer, right? So it comes up with some questions, answers, and just a guide, right? And again, just the kind of concepts, kind of things that you want to do when you go to validate, right? And so validate isn't just, I'm going to go build a prototype. It may be that I want to have a phone call with a couple of my customers. Maybe I want to get a group of customers together. Maybe I'm getting ready to go to a conference. So I want to ask people questions. So I have a questionnaire that I built. And I'm not going to go through all these, but you might want to do some problem sizing, right? Now, with the problem sizing, it would be more than just how big is this from a delivery standpoint. But if I'm looking at my data, what can I do, right? Like how important is this? Just some toggles, some movement. What is the cost of the problem? And then, how much do I expect to get in return if I fix this, right? So some analytics around that. This is starting to help. If you have real data behind this, this could become very powerful. And then the concept of, let's build a visual prototype. So in this case, what it does is it'll go out, and again, this is AI helping us out, right? So it went through the discovery process and figured out a couple of things. And so you can either copy this prompt into something like Lovable or run a build. Now, one of the things I want to be clear about is, like, I'm not trying to do a product demo. All of this stuff you could do right now outside of inside of like ChatGPT or Claude Code, right? So if you have a discovery engine, if you get that information out, you have the concepts that the customer is asking for, right? They're asking for. They notice that when they query or search things in support, sometimes they're getting answers that aren't grounded in reality in your website, right? That's a problem, right? You want it to tell you the truth. Well, you could take that information and do discovery with like Claude Cowork, right? You could point it to your website and you could run that prompt and see if it answers the question, or if it comes back and says, I can't find that information on your website, right? So what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to leverage this data to then go do something, right? The reason I was doing this is that, to me, I think visually it's easier to kind of see that than to kind of talk about it, right? Because really what you're trying to get to is, is this viable? Is this something that we want to build? And do I have evidence that we should move forward, right? And so you want to be able to trace that evidence back. Again, I could take all that evidence, feed it into ChatGPT or Claude Cowork probably, feed it in, get some information back, and then use that to create an epic or a feature inside of AHA, right? So, like, not, again, this is just a prototype. This isn't a product.
Yeah, but I think the key differentiator of the discovery agent too, though, is that it does, comb through. Yes, you can certainly feed that all into to Claude, but I think pulling it all together, right, and then getting to that prototype quickly. Imagine if you're right, a salesperson, and you want to, you have a customer meeting, and then 2 weeks later you have another meeting with that same customer. You're not going to have the opportunity to wait for product and technology to go build something for you, right? So being able to take all of this information and then go back to the customer quickly is super important. And then also it informs the product and tech teams what the customers are actually looking for. Oftentimes I've experienced, hey, that's great that you built that, but it doesn't quite hit the mark with what our customers were asking for. Bringing all of this information together, having that prototype, and being able to show that quickly and getting that feedback, that rapid feedback, and then back into the hands of product and tech, I think that's a game changer for how we can build products.
Yeah. All right. And so that's what gives you this evidence, not an opinion, right? So basically what's happening is by doing that, the prototypes are based in the information that you're pulling from your discovery engine. And then, you're going through this process of, how do I score it, right? Is it useful? Did the customer actually use it? The one thing that's nice about uh, being able to prototype is that there are a bunch of different methods of prototyping, right? There's this concept of a fake door, right? So you could actually put up what looks like a website of a new product, and then when people click it, you let them know that, hey, we're thinking about building this. Would you like, to be in the discovery process, or do you want to jump on a call? And some customers will do that, or some potential clients. Other things are maybe you're trying to determine the best way to lay out some of the information. Like you have this cool new feature, but it's not getting the uptake that you wanted. Like, so for example, I think the big thing is right now everybody's putting AI someplace in their app. And I noticed there are a couple of applications I use, and I'm like, oh wow, there's like an AI button over here in the top corner. I didn't even see it. And so I ran a short prototype with 3 different screens that I built lovable in probably 30 minutes. And each screen had the button in a different place. One had where I thought people would see a chat. It was basically a normal chat bot box at the bottom of the screen. And then the others had kind of cute buttons off to the right and left. And I sent that out, asked a bunch of people to, different people. I sent different screens, and then you have to instrument it. So I could see people where they clicked, and out of which prototype, which people actually found and tried to use the AI piece, right? And in this case, I was correct. It turned out that the one they used the most was with the chatbot window at the bottom, right? But when you have that kind of evidence, it becomes very clear as to what you need to do. Now, I know it's a simple feature, but these are the type of things that you can do. So obviously, what we want to do is we want to understand. People say things and then they do something else, right? So what are the kind of things? Obviously, when we're doing these things, we want to make sure that we're not, we don't have any problems with any kind of boundary tests, prompt injection, and things like that. This is why, again, it's nice to have this in sort of an AI engine. If you're building, if you come out of your evidence engine, you take your evidence and you build a prototype, you can help lock it down and make sure that it's not run across any boundary tests. You can make sure no PII is coming through it, things like that, right? So it takes some of that worry off of your product team. But basically, in this case, what we're telling the assistant is don't invent policy, respond, don't expose PII, and escalate if your confidence is low, right? So what you want to be able to do is prototype that and make sure that that's how the chatbot's responding, right? And you can do that pretty easily. So what they did versus what they said, right? So, hey, I definitely use this. Oh, that sounds really cool. And then you find out that, they go into your prototype, and after the third question, they stop clicking around, right? I found that in the prototypes that I put out. It wasn't that exciting. And I purposely didn't tell anybody what the app was. And it was just simply a mail app that had some AI built into it. And people, I could see them open it up, see it's a mail app, didn't see the AI and just closed it, right? And then other people that when they saw the AI part, they actually tried to use it, and it had some faux responses, like you would search for an email and it would kind of grep through. Didn't have real AI built in the back end, but it did give you that experience of what would happen. right? But you could see it was very clear that people were clicking through the application. And so that's more valuable than asking somebody, hey, would you use an email application with AI built in? Like, I don't know, right? But so we want to basically validating our assistant, right? Was the output quality good, right? If we did it get grounded when the users used it, we could give them questions, we could drive through the application, show them what a response would look like with the right answer, and show them what a response would look like if we didn't know what the answer was, and get their feedback on, hey, did you feel better about the fact that it came back and told you it didn't know the answer? And is this language like helpful to you, right? And just make sure some of these other things. So we'll do this in a week. Quick slice goes out, you learn a lot, and it's very inexpensive way to validate some assumptions, right? Again, this, like, if you talk to, like, if any of the old product coaches that I used to work with and product managers from back in the day, they'd all go like, duh, right? Like, they've been saying this for years, right? This is what we need to do. The problem is we didn't do it for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them were technical. It's difficult to do. Today with AI, this is not hard to do at all, right? Now, the question is it backed in real data? Right? Because then that's what the customers are going to care about, right? If you keep sending me a bunch of prototypes of your application that don't really resonate with the problems I think I have, then it's just going to start to irritate me. So expensive way to learn, right? There's a couple different, I forget where I got this example, but basically a team spent a sprint building a analytic dashboard for somebody, and turned out that all the customers wanted was some sort of alerting system to tell them that they needed to go look. Because apparently there was a dashboard. It wasn't great, but they were used to what it looked like. So all they really want to know was send me some alerts if I need to go look at something. Instead, what they did was they redesigned the dashboard, and the users still didn't have their alerting system, right? So if they had spent a week and done a prototype or a prototype, that would have surfaced almost immediately, right? It's the second somebody saw it, they would have said, hey, where's, like, is it going to alert me? I don't need a new dashboard, right? And so that window is cheap, right? Build it a couple of days, give them time to play with it, and then you have your answer, right? And then this all leads to the end, right? Which is, I'm either going to say go, no go, or we need to revise the hypothesis, right? All of those are valid decisions, right? We didn't spend a lot of time, so no go is valid. You could also put, I don't know if you put it under the revise, but maybe you want to put it in a state where you revisit it later. Maybe you're waiting for one of the nice things that Melissa has done is that there's an evidence graph that's historical. So let's say today you're looking at the evidence coming out of this information, and a couple things are popping up, but nothing too exciting, right? It's kind of moving to the top, not very high prioritization. But then as time goes on, more and more people bring up the same issue. Maybe start getting information from Zendesk. Maybe a couple salespeople start hearing about it from their customers, and so now maybe you started to take it in. Turns out that it wasn't great. You weren't getting a lot of great response, and then you basically put it back on the list, and then you started getting more evidence that kind of pushed it up the list again. And now with that evidence, you have new stakeholders that have called, and now you have new people you can talk to, right? So having that kind of live system going on in the background is better than what happens now, where, like, for example, you'd have analysts that would go in and pull all this data, assemble it all, and you go into quarterly planning. Well, if somebody's got to do that, they're not going to do that every week, right? They're going to do it once a month, once a quarter, whatever, right? And what I'd argue is you'd want this to be going on a continual basis as information's coming in. One of the other things we'll talk about in the next couple of webinars is that we want this feedback loop to, defects you'd love to have come back into the system to automatically get fixed, right, through coding agents. But you also want the feedback of the product to come back in. So, for example, let's say you had a couple things where people called up and said, "Hey, this is really cool, but it's starting to reach towards the edge of like I need a response back in 10 seconds from your LLM," right? In today's day and age, like an LLM, you can get 10 seconds. Some people are happy with that. Some people still complain. But if it's going to creep over 10 seconds, then maybe it's going to be a problem for your customers, right? So that's the NFR that you put in place, right? So luckily, you went out and you deployed this thing, and it's getting you 5-7 second response time. Everybody's happy, but then as the system's being used, you start to realize that maybe response time is starting to creep up, or you lose your voice. But you see response time starting to creep up, right? You want that fed back into your discovery engine, right? Because now your discovery engine can alert you to the fact that, hey, this XYZ feature that you're making a ton of money off of is starting to creep up from a performance level. Now, again, you don't just go fix it. Now you can basically build a prototype that returns responses back and force them to come back in 15 seconds. And then give that to these customers that originally told you it had to be 5 seconds or 10 or whatever the number was. And so now they start to see it, and it's come back at 15, and you ask them, how was the response time? Oh, it's cool. It's great. Love it. All right. Awesome. So maybe I don't need to do anything, right? Different ways that you can use these kind of things, right? You don't have to just constantly go back in and change things in the system. You can use it as indicators to get in front of your customers. Because again, their taste change, right? Maybe the data is just so valuable that they're getting out of the new feature that, the extra 5 seconds really wasn't a problem. But who knew that at the beginning, right? So again, go, no go, revise. Revise to me can also be put it back on the list or ignore it, right? So basically, when you're looking at these decisions, do you want to build it now? Do you want to revise, defer it, or exclude it? Right. This list is a little bit more what I would use as opposed to just revise, go, no go. Right. And your exit criteria is basically your validation decision. Are you ready to build? What would you hand from that point? What would you hand off to development to go build it? So from the governance layer, right, we have these 8 supporting governance features that run along underneath. And so in pillars 1 and 2, what's going to happen is it's really going to be more around solution alignment, looking at economics, cost to serve, your safety guardrails as far as PII, and escalation of issues, right? If I'm looking at my discovery engine, and maybe what we do is we have kind of a normal escalation process, and then maybe we want to put an extra little kicker in as if it's our biggest customer and they've asked twice, then maybe we want to push it up a little bit. So we could put that into some guardrails in the system, right? So guardrails don't always have to be, hey, don't do this, refuse this, whatever. But could be some extra escalation that you kind of customize based on responses that you've been getting. Understand data sources and their context, right? And then on the right-hand side, it's really the supporting stuff, right? The architecture, engineering, and that part of the stack. Those are the right half of the stack is really comes more into play as we move into pillars 3, 4, and 5. So again, validation, the cheapest, but it's the most expensive to skip. If we skip this, we have a problem, right? And we want to be able to do that. So again, we get evidence and context from some sort of discovery process, right? And then we take that and we act on that. We do that analysis, and then we act on it somehow to get proof and confidence to either move forward or to shut things down. Melissa, I know I kept talking nonstop, but anything you want to say before we kind of, because we're going to wrap up right after this.
No, no, I don't think so. I think, yeah, I think just getting that insight, with the evidence, as you've discussed, is going to be critical, as we go forward with AI. It's a lot of, hey, we don't need this role or we don't need that role, but the reality is we do still need humans in the loop, and we need to get the evidence behind the data that's coming out of these agents, to support what we want to go after. So.
Yeah, and this, what's interesting is again, the pillars aren't sequential, but when I talked about the delivery and design pillar last week, there was a lot of basically you bounce into validation and out, right? In and out, right? So you're getting this information and you're kind of iterating through, hey, I'm doing some discovery, I see this information, I'm going to go try to validate my some response or some idea I have. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one of the stakeholders Melissa works with, pointed out something very true is that it doesn't have to come from the discovery engine, right? Like the discovery engine are going to be things that you're talking to your current customers, but there are ideas that you have in your organization, right? A lot of good ideas come from engineering, right? They're in the product, they have an idea, they've been talking to a couple of customers, maybe product manager says something, they're like, hey, we could actually do this. That would be kind of cool. There's no reason why that the product manager couldn't go and use the validation pillar to go validate that type of product, right? And then drive things from there. So the idea is it's cheaper. It's always been the right thing to do, but it's cheaper and easier now than it's ever been. So if you're not doing this, you're just being lazy. So knock it off. But you got to get in and start to do this. I see a lot of product managers really excited about it. I was on a call with some product managers, and when they found Lovable, they went crazy, right? Because they're like, "Oh my God, I can create prototypes all day long." I'm like, "Oh, awesome!" Right? So product teams are really excited about this, and
And
I
I
think
think tech teams are going to be excited about it too, right? Because at the end of the day, as a technologist, you want to build something that people are excited to use. And it's like there's nothing worse than hearing that didn't quite hit the mark, right? And so I think you're going to have your technologists and really that that three-legged stool between your commercial product and tech are all going to be super excited if we're building better products together. So.
yeah, absolutely. We'll end on that note because I love that. Are there any questions? Next week, what we're going to do is go into pillar 4. We're going to talk about deploy and monitor. Are there any questions or anything, Jason? Got anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just like to say I've never seen you be so emotional on a topic like this discovery stuff. I mean, you're breaking up. Like I wasn't sure if you were kind of misting over.
And
So
I was gonna cry.
really appreciate the commitment on this topic. Hey, one of my clients who had a conflict today at noon wanted to ask, what are the key learnings? Like, were there any surprises? Were there any ahas? Well, yeah, ahas, as you were piloting this, because they're very interested in exploring this, and they just wanted to kind of benefit from the work that you guys have already done. Were there any kind of lessons learned as you kind of scaled up this process?
Melissa,
Oh,
mostly
that's
from
yeah. I
it,
mean, I think the big lesson learned is that, initially people are a bit cautious, right? As we started to introduce some of the AI practices, and how is this actually going to all work? But ultimately, I think folks so far have really embraced what we are introducing to the teams. And the more teams that are using the discovery agent and some of the other stuff that's been released is we're going faster and we're getting it right and we're getting the quality better. And so I think those are the things that we wanted, but I think there was a lot of skepticism about is this really going to work and how are we going to do this? I think the key piece too is that folks were a little bit skeptical because they thought they were being measured on, how much AI they're using, or, is this the right thing for us to be putting into our system? And yeah, I mean, I think all signs have pointed to this is a game changer for us. So been very helpful. Look forward to continuing to scale it.
Awesome. Cool.
Was that it?
I didn't see any other questions. And, give folks just 2 seconds. Any other questions before we wrap? Happy to give folks a few minutes back in their day. All right. Well, why don't we call it a wrap? Melissa, thank you for joining today. It's always a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Marty, thanks for spearheading this.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.